Mother Nature is organized according to a certain number of principles. She seems to prefer certain shapes to others. This is what we call isomorphism. Time, for its part, occurs in regular cycles. Even the formation of clouds can now be studied by a whole new geometry, the geometry of fractals. For those who lived in antiquity, it was simple. In the beginning, there was chaos, that is, disorder, after which came order, the cosmos. The organization of forms in nature corresponded, according to some, to an expression of divine will, and to others, to the application of a rational plan. In fact, the assumption has always been that none of any of the forms in the universe are a matter of chance. For example, have you ever noticed the resemblance between the shape of a fern and the shape of frost crystals on a window in winter? The question is always the same. Why does nature seem to privilege certain forms? Trees and clouds, blades of grass and galaxies. As they present themselves before us, natural creations seem to be of an infinite variety. Among the plethora of shapes, however, some startling parallels can be drawn. The ramifications of a tree's branches strangely resemble those of the arteries of the human body. The spiral of a fern's crozier to that of a shell. In all of creation, the same patterns spring up all the time. Where do these mysterious resemblances come from? From the fact that natural forms were not fashioned by chance, but rather by immutable laws. One of these laws states that everything in the universe has an irresistible tendency to disorder. Over time, a poorly kept house will fall prey to disorder. To fight this universal tendency, a great deal of energy must be expended. To create orderly forms from disorder and to maintain them, nature too must expend energy. Thus, nature's favorite forms are, as a rule, those that require the least expenditure of energy. Crystals, for example, are among the most perfect forms in nature. Their origins date back to the beginning of time. Then the universe was no more than a burning and disorderly atomic cloud. When it cooled down, atoms settled into orderly arrangements in the shape of little bricks. The assembly of these little bricks, one on top of the other, produced the symmetrical forms of crystals. In fact, among the infinity of arrangements of atoms in these basic units, only 14 are found in nature. Even though hundreds of thousands of chemical and mineral species make up crystals, these are all formed from one of the 14 basic arrangements. It is these arrangements that require the least outlay of energy. Living forms comply with the same rules of simplicity and economy as lifeless matter. Thus, in all of nature, there are only 5 volumes made up of identical faces. The tetrahedron, the cube, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, and the icosahedron. A number of viruses have adopted one or the other of these 5 simple geometric structures. All they have to do is produce and combine a series of identical faces. This enables them to grow with the smallest quantities of materials and energy possible. Much more evolved, bees instinctively give the alveoli of their honeycombs a hexagonal shape. Of all the figures that can be combined to make mosaics, the hexagon is the one that covers the largest surface for the smallest perimeter. The hexagonal structure of the alveoli therefore enables bees to store a maximum of honey with a minimum of wax and to make the maximum number of cells. As life evolved, natural shapes diversified considerably. Indeed, living species have the capacity to absorb energy, which allows them to develop and keep complex shapes. However, once again, nature chose the simplest and most efficient shapes. Therefore, the spiral-shaped shell shared by a number of mollusks can grow continuously while occupying less space than if it developed lengthwise. The spiral is thus the most efficient and the most discrete form to ensure the animal's protection and allow it to develop. Despite this diversity, hosts of living species share amazing similarities. For instance, the organs of all the higher plants come from only 3 basic structures: stems, which group bulbs, tubers, tendrils, or trunks; roots in a variety of shapes; and leaves, which can be prickly and infinitely serrate, or even colored when they are flowers. In living beings, the environment is also an important factor in modeling shapes. Thus, species which are basically very different, such as the dolphin, a mammal, and the shark, a fish, ended up with a similar shape. That shape is the most suited to their common environment, water. The first to take an interest in the study of natural forms were the ancient Greeks. Today, this study helps us better understand how our universe came into being and evolved. Nature is not only organized in terms of its structure, it's also organized in time. In a temperate country, there is nothing so natural as to see buds appear in springtime and leaves fall in autumn. The bustling activity in our cities tends to make us forget that life on Earth is ruled by cycles. Yet in the animal world, respecting these cycles is essential for the safety and survival of species. Several types of birds and fish migrate when the weather gets too cold. Salmon and eels swim fantastic distances to find conditions suitable for mating. Such behavior patterns are both a response to seasonal signals and the result of internal programming associated with hormone secretions. But what about man? Are we as intimately linked to the cycles of nature? It would seem we are. We know that man has his own neuroendocrinal calendar. Over a 24-hour period, our body temperature, the secretion of hormones, the activity of our organs, all change. Our organism's resistance varies from one season to another. This cyclic organization in time appears to be one of the universe's fundamental laws. Like a gigantic clock, the universe seems locked into an infinite series of cycles. The galaxies slowly spin. Stars are born and die. Accompanied by their processions of satellites, the planets make periodic rotations around the stars, while revolving on their own axis. These rhythms of the heavens profoundly influence the prevailing conditions on our planet. The Earth's annual revolution around the sun produces the seasons. Our planet's rotation on its axis generates the alternation of days and nights. The gravitation of the moon around the Earth, together with the movements of the Earth around the sun, causes tides, which in turn changes climate. Subjected to these cycles over millions of years, living beings have developed sophisticated adaptation mechanisms. In spring, for instance, the undergrowth in temperate regions becomes covered with flowers. Owing to molecules sensitive to sunlight, phytochromes, Undergrowth plants perceive the lengthening of days. When daylight lasts a given length of time, the phytochromes trigger the blooming process. These species achieve their entire biological cycle in a few weeks, before the leaves have developed to the point where they prevent the sunlight from reaching the ground. Many animal behavior patterns also follow the seasonal variations of light and temperature. Every spring, at a precise moment, scores of birds undertake lengthy migrations toward their nesting grounds. Upon their arrival, they mark out a territory and mate. Every animal species also has its own daily cycle of activity and rest. Some are active and eat during the day. Others are only active during the night. Scientists have discovered that the biological cycles of animal species, including man, are in fact ruled by a veritable internal clock. That clock is located in an area of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. At night, the suprachiasmatic nucleus sends signals to a small gland located at the top of the brain, the pineal body. The pineal body then begins to secrete a hormone, melatonin. Released into the bloodstream, melatonin reaches all the body's organs. It affects the maturation of sexual organs, appetite, rhythms of activity, skin pigmentation. During the day, however, the pineal body ceases to secrete melatonin. Such daily and seasonal fluctuations in the secretion of melatonin indicates to animals when to eat, migrate, reproduce, shed, or sleep. The biological clock is also present in man. In 1962, a speleologist spent 62 days alone in a cave without a watch or a clock. In spite of his isolation, he awakened, ate, and slept at regular hours. His wakeful and sleeping cycles lasted an average of 24 to 30 hours. However, if the temporal isolation is too prolonged, the biological cycles will be disrupted. The internal clock needs to be set continually in order to maintain a precise 24-hour cycle. To do this, our eyes pick up fluctuations in ambient light and send the information through the nerve fibers to the internal clock in our brain. A deregulation of our biological clock can have serious repercussions. In travelers, for instance, time lag causes the secretion of melatonin to no longer occur according to the day and night pattern. And this is what brings on the discomfort and fatigue we call jet lag. Generally, the biological clock requires 1 day of rest for each hour of time lag in order to synchronize itself again with the 24-hour cycle. Understanding biological cycles has opened the door to interesting therapy possibilities. For example, treatment of seasonal depression. When the autumn days become shorter, people who suffer from this illness experience a loss of appetite and sleep problems coupled with a strong feeling of depression. In such people, melatonin secretions are insufficient. They can increase them, though, by exposing themselves to artificial light 2 hours a day. Their condition improves dramatically. Nonetheless, we still have a great deal to learn about the cycles and rhythms that make us tick. So it's not just on a whim that we long to fly south for a few days when we begin to get the winter blahs. So far we have dealt with order. Still, there are some natural phenomena that appear totally disorderly. For example, It's impossible at first glance to find any kind of logical organization in the formation of clouds or in the turbulence of waterways. But certain natural objects have a mathematical property called scale invariance. A shore, for example, seems to have jagged shape whether you look at a 1,000-kilometer or a 100-kilometer section of it. Such objects are called fractal objects. Their study is a promising new branch of geometry. Certain natural objects have a mathematical property called scale invariance. Observe, for instance, this fern. You recognize its characteristic shape, delicately serrate. Now concentrate on the fern's lobe. It looks a lot like the whole of the plant. Whatever the scale of your observation, it's always the same tracing that seems to reappear. This property is shared by several natural objects. A shore, for example, seems to have the same jagged shape, whether you look at a 1,000-kilometer, 10-kilometer, or 100 meters. Such objects are called fractal objects. Their study is a promising new branch of geometry, which is offering amazing uses already. Fractal geometry makes it possible to build complex forms from a simple equation. To build a fractal object, the mathematician subjects a point to a certain number of transformations. He thus obtains a simple geometric figure. He then subjects this figure to the same mathematical transformations. A complex figure appears. This operation is repeated dozens of times, each time producing a more complex figure. Depending on the mathematical transformation used, figures of many varied forms can be produced. All these fractals were generated from a single, simple equation, recalculated many times by computer. An enlarged detail of one of these objects is similar to the object in its entirety. The most interesting aspect of fractal geometry is that it enables scientists to reproduce complex natural forms and study their behavior. Clouds, for example. Meteorologists know that clouds are formed by huge whirlwinds of vapor, inside which are smaller and smaller whirlwinds. Clouds are fractal objects. A tiny portion of a cloud looks exactly like the cloud as a whole. Based on relatively simple mathematical equations and meteorological data obtained by radar, physicists are able to generate figures which faithfully represent the clouds passing over a given region. A cloud formation's dynamics and evolution in time can also be precisely analyzed. According to researchers, the mathematical representation will enable them to evaluate the quantity of water contained in clouds with much greater accuracy than with conventional methods. This research could lead to more reliable weather forecasts. Fractal geometry might also become a valuable tool for interpreting images obtained by satellite. Current analysis techniques do not enable scientists to extract all the information contained in the pictures. Thanks to fractal geometry, the precision of their analyses could be greatly heightened. Fractals are creating interest not only in the scientific community, but with artists as well. The figures are generated from simple equations. It would also be possible, by varying the equations and parameters, to create exquisite animated figures. The possibilities of this new fractal geometry seem endless. From Plato to Mandelbrot, through Einstein and Baudelaire, it appears that philosophers, mathematicians, scientists, and poets all have a role to play in constantly questioning the secret laws that govern our universe.